Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to view Blankman. So before we had a lot of movies about common men fighting crime, we would go on to have a comedy about common men fighting crime. So this movie is still funny. This movie is still hilarious. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Yeah, there might be a lot of language in this film, but I still got a good laugh out of this film. And so we have one man who, of course, was inspired by Adam West's Batman from 1996 to become a cape and sock wielding hero, using gadgets to hopefully make his city become a better place. And we, of course, have another guy who is forced by his brother to become a costume wielding hero, really just to protect his brother from certain situations where his life may be at risk. And we, of course, have the other guy come in with a actual karate or combative like skill, where, of course, oftentimes we would just have Blankman get lucky. So we have often these characters need to try to do like common things like save a woman from an elevator or rescue a dog from underneath a house, to then further and further get them into stuff that would put people's lives at risk. That, of course, would be dealing with bombs quite often, as if we are to really have the tagline of dynamic duo probably somewhere in this film because of how many bombs were to be or go off in this film. And so, while going through all of these missions or these trials or these tribulations or whichever, we find that Blankman and other guy are to have a villain or an arch nemesis called Manelli. And so we find that Manelli is to bribe and extort everyone in town to control them. And so we, of course, have Blankman and other guy who are to come after Manelli because of a death, or by the end of this movie, number of deaths that have occurred because of Manelli. So, with that said, we have this movie just be a lot of fun, and is to even like kind of poke at the fact that these characters are trying to be somewhat similar to Adam West's Batman, and we of course have a bit of fun with this and so on and so forth. So with that said, I think Blankman, oddly enough, is a great film just because it's so funny. We even have like these characters that go through a lot through this film, even to get to a point where they are to give up on being Blankman and other guy to work at a McDonald's. To really see what it's like to just be a common man and not step in and try to do the right things at certain times. So, with that said, where can you go on and see this movie? I believe that this movie is still, or this movie is available on Amazon. I, of course, am to also state that there is an app that does have a bizarre name called Zeliphonic. Zelivonic. Zeliphonic. This and a number of apps for the time of which that I've kind of done this have always kind of changed and differed and whatever, of which that I've gone on and stated. At certain points, there have been apps called Vidlessy, Vidlesy, or Yes Movies, or any number of things that I can go on and try to justify to you, where you can go through and find a lot of movies for absolutely free. So, with that said, let's go on and state that it's about that time to just get into spoilers and talk more in depth about this film, as hopefully no one ever goes on to call me Susan. I told you, Susan! Somebody help that woman! Still, so funny. It is. So, with that said, I think it's about that time to double fire this bad boy up. It's about that time yet again to, of course, go into blank time, blank time. It's about that time again to blank it up, because let's go into spoilers. When you go on and you don't really think through what you're gonna say when you've reinvented your spoiler time moment. Anyways, so with that said, let's go into the beginning of this. So we have young Daryl and Kevin, who are actually played by Wayanses. That's kind of really interesting. And so we have young Daryl and Kevin who are watching Batman Atom West from '66, and we have them watching this on not so good of a TV, and so because the picture is kind of coming in and out, we start to have Daryl that scrambles and is to get all this aluminum foil to attach to the TV, to then attach to their toilet, and so when they go on to realize that they can flush the toilet and the picture looks well, both the kids scramble to get all the way back to watch Batman, and they are consistently flushing the toilet. We start to see Grandma Walker, who is to realize that water is coming into her kitchen, and so immediately she realizes what the kids are doing, and is to want to skin their hides because, of course, she realizes that both of them are in trouble. The kids are, of course, to not even really be paying attention to what Grandma is telling them, as they, of course, are too focused on Batman and Robin. So, we are to queue up some time later. So, we have Kevin, who is trying to sneak a woman out of his house, because he is now much older, and so we have Kevin, who is just kind of hoping that his grandmother is not going to notice, and she does. So the grandmother Walker is to go on and tell Kevin, you should at least try to defeat that woman. Luckily you're a quick finisher, because man, I wouldn't have liked to have heard you just going on and on all night long. And so the two of them are to try to change the subject and start talking about Mayor Harris, and start to get breakfast together, as Kevin's like, well, hey, really? Getting breakfast? Is aren't we a little old for that? We then cue Daryl, who is to use this massive machine to get his morning together by brushing his teeth and all kinds of things. It's a whole huge gadget for all that. And so we have Daryl coming out of his room, and so we have, of course, Grandma Walker that tells Daryl, it's well, hey, I heard you, talking to yourself, all night long. Daryl, what was the problem? Why couldn't you sleep? And so Daryl is trying to perfect this, this unusual gadget that is to, of course, be this kind of certain predator of sorts. And so the grandmother, of course, the state is man, you are such a genius, and so on and so forth. And Kevin goes on to state, it's like, well, like one of those inventions are going to blow us up one day. I just know it. So we have Daryl that wants to go on and give Kevin a gift. And so we have J5 that brings uh, this gift in. And come to find out, it is to be a walkie-talkie belt buckle. And so we have Kevin who has zero interest in wearing this until his grandmother is to force him to. And so we have Daryl that is to tell Kevin, it's like, well, hey, like, so I'm gonna talk to you on the belt buckle every hour on the hour, and Kevin says like, well, hey, if I don't respond, just leave a message as a joke. So, because of course this is a walkie-talkie, but like we're just having comedy here. So we have Kevin who is to leave and head to work, and he makes it to this elevator where he immediately hits on a girl named Kimberly Jones, who we'll find out is to be our love interest or damsel in distress for Blankman, not other guy. So, for how much time Kevin is really putting into the work trying to win over Kimberly Jones, it will never work out. Sadly enough. So, we have Kevin that is desperately trying to follow Jones to find out that a man is to tell Kevin of like, well, hey, like you don't belong here. Like, go to your basement, your dungeon. And so Kevin then leaves to meet up with Mr. Stone, who is to tell him how to make up stories by basically chucking darts at a dartboard and having them writing these fake stories just to make a buck. So we have Daryl that goes to his like I'm assuming like restoration shop to talk to Mr. Crud, who of course is upset about how Daryl had gone on to adjust a toaster way too much, more than a person was to have wanted. And so we have Daryl who tries to go on and explain how like the heat of the toaster would go on and make all of these other things for this person, but we of course have Mr. Crud who's like, just make this a toaster again and just fix it. So all of a sudden we have Daryl whose predator invention is to start to turn on and start flying around this area because it is to be sound activated by a sound of a fly. So we have this predator that is to go on and do its job and then go back down to where it was. And we of course have Mr. Crud who's like, is that thing okay? It's like, so Daryl goes on and is to take off his jumpsuit, who is kind of soaked with chemicals, and he ends up putting it on a open flame, it seems. And so when Daryl goes back to his jumpsuit to put it back on, he then realizes that it's indestructible, that a flame will not even allow it to burn up. So we are to transition next to Mayor Harris, who is to have a phone call about their poll results, and it seems that he is 5% above his competitor. So here comes in Manelli, who is to want to fund Harris, and Harris really isn't interested. We have Manelli, who is to kind of openly tell Harris this right in front of all of these people that are trying to campaign for Harris, because Harris won't allow them to talk about this privately. So Manelli was also to get hassled by Grandma Walker, who wants nothing to do with Manelli or to have Harris being connected to him. So that kind of starts something which will finish at some point later. So Jones gets a card from Kevin while she's getting something out of a vending machine, and we all of a sudden notice, as Daryl is to kind of smooth talk Jones, that he then all of a sudden is to have his belt buckle go off, and Daryl is to try to talk uh, with of course Kevin, and so Kevin is to try to respond to Daryl, but then right as Jones comes to watch what uh, Kevin is doing, he all of a sudden looks like he is to be talking to his down belows, and so he talks about like him wanting to take it out and play with it later, and and Jones is like, yeah, like about what we kind of said, like, nah, I'm reconsidering, and so she walks away, and she's like, no, 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 no. So Kevin's like, no, 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 like I wasn't talking about jammies, and so on and so forth. So, like his Hosen runner. So, uh, we have Harris's campaign building get robbed by these ski mask thugs led by Sammy, who is to go on and shoot the people that were to have campaigned for Harris. And so we, of course, have to go on and have Grandma Walker's funeral, which we, of course, have Daryl that is to go on and need a tissue from Kevin, and like Kevin kind of blows his nose all over this thing and gives it right back to Kevin, and Kevin's like, nah. So we then have Kevin who wants to talk to Daryl, as Daryl instead stops a woman from losing her purse on this subway. And so we have Daryl that grabs this man and shoves him out of this subway to find out that this guy is to try to whip out a knife. And we all of a sudden have Daryl who's like, oh my god, he has a knife, he has a knife. And by the time, luckily, that the subway doors close, we have this man who is to have not hurt anyone, but is to just kind of like, of course, just be stuck to have not gone on and taken this purse, whatever that means. So we go on to have Daryl that starts to look at his neighborhood and is to realize that people are gambling on the streets. There, of course, is a tire that has a boot on its car. Or no, wait, let me go back to that. We have a car that has a boot on its tire, and it's still just driving along no matter what. And we also have Kevin that realizes one of the houses in his neighborhood is a crack house, and he wants to go in there and stop that from happening. And so we have Kevin that is to grab Daryl and is to tell him, it's like, well, hey, like, what are you trying to do? like, you're not Batman. Like, you can't just go on and, like, stop all of this from happening. And so then Daryl realizes that he needs to become Batman to possibly save his community. So Daryl is to take his jumpsuit and burn his jumpsuit and to stab into it, and he realizes that the blade will not go on and puncture into the jumpsuit. So while, of course, we have Daryl doing that, Jones is on the news doing this report and asks who will save our streets as the police are on strike. So Daryl goes on to bulletproof his clothes, kind of dipping them into this tub, as Kevin knocks on the door of this bathroom, needing Daryl to just go back to sleep. So Daryl is to show off to Kevin his hero costume, and Kevin tells Daryl if he wears that, people will lock him up in the nut house. So we really start to realize, possibly from this movie, that cosplay has probably been way more accepted, and kind of geeky, nerdy things would go on and be much more like acceptable, like in this time, than they might have been in the past. Going on and probably making fun of people like, well, hey man, it's not Halloween. Like that kind of consistent joke would always be in like the very early superhero movies. So we have Daryl that is to start to show off his gadgets to Kevin, while Kevin is really just trying to go back to sleep. We have Daryl that is to show him his cuffs and the new chucks, and so we all of a sudden also have J5 that is to bring in Kevin's costume. Kevin's like, I'm not gonna be caught dead wearing that thing. So we have Kevin the following day, who is talking to Mr. Stone about Daryl and that bills are piling up. And so Mr. Stone is like, well, do you think I'm going to feel bad for you? It's like, oh, I'm obviously talking to the wrong person. So Kevin is to all of a sudden see Jones, and she desperately needs a cameraman to work for her on this report. So Kevin is now like, all right, like I can go on and be a cameraman, so it kind of feels like a promotion for him. So he's all excited about that. So Kevin runs home to try and tell Daryl about him being a cameraman now, and we of course have Daryl, who is to leave uh, we have let me pause here for a second. So Daryl leaves Kevin a note telling him that he is off stopping crime, convincing his consciousness will be his guide, and to wear the costume. As we have Blankman that is to go out and fight crime. So Blankman is to have this weird gadget that can get radio frequency off of this cop car, and so he finds out that there is a crime taking place on the 10th Street. So Blankman tries going into a bus to have the bus take him to this crime, And we have the bus driver that tells him it's way out of his way, and for him to just kind of shut up and just kind of get in the bus like all the other freaks. So when Blankman goes on and tells him it's like, well, hey, this is like a this is an emergency and so on and so forth, we just have this bus driver that is a tank Blankman and throw him out of the bus. So we come to have a man named Biff who is going on and trying to shake down this woman for money. And we all of a sudden find Blankman making his way into this same alley to stop Biff from doing this. So we have Biff who realizes that Blankman is trying to stop whatever it is he is doing. So Biff is to tell Blankman that he will go on and treat Blankman just like any of his women. And so we have Blankman that it's like, well, hey, like, slap me around and call me Susan. And so we, of course, have Biff that takes him up on that offer. Just starts, somebody help that woman. I told you, Susan. So we have Biff who becomes tired of slapping Blankman around, and so he, of course, is to whip out his gun and shoot Blankman in the chest. And so after Blankman, it seems, is to have his bulletproof suit work, we then have Blankman get right back up, and we immediately have the people that are with Biff go on and say, it's like, well, hey, how about you shoot him in the head? And we have Biff is like, yeah, I'm going to shoot him in the head. And Blankman is like, whoops. So Kevin all of a sudden comes in and is to kick away the gun and is to tell him, or tell Daryl and him to himself, like, hey, let's get out of here. So we then have Blankman that makes his way to this police station to try and talk with the police commissioner to try and organize a working relationship between him and the police force to stop crime. And we immediately have the police officers that are behind this counter who cannot stop laughing. What is your name? Tell him your name, please. And so we, of course, have Blankman, who at this point doesn't have the name Blankman. And so he's like, well, like, the only thing that I can come up with is Brother Man. And they're like, Brother Man, ha ha ha. So they just continue to nonstop laughing. We have one guy who's to pick up a phone. And he's like, he hangs it up. And so we have them laughing, these police officers, at the fact that this guy wants to desperately talk to the commissioner, and who is he to get this? And so we have these police officers who call upon this commissioner to let them know that Craphead Man is to need to talk to, of course, the commissioner. So we have, of course, Blankman, who refuses to leave until he talks to the commissioner, and then the police officers are like, oh, okay, all right. So we find out that Blankman, of course, is to get arrested. And so we have Kevin that goes on to bail out Daryl, and so the police officer tells him that Daryl, or whoever this caped man is, needs to seek out therapy. So we go on to have both Kevin and Daryl that are in this therapy session with Dr. Norris. So we have Dr. Norris, who, of course, is performing this Rorschach test, or this kind of ink blot-like thing. And so we have Daryl starting to name off all these things fairly easily, but then we end up, of course, having Dr. Norris stump Daryl by showing him an ink blot of what, of course, still looked like a woman's chest, completely stumping him. And so we have Kevin, who is to interrupt this therapy session and start to talk about how Daryl was stopping crime. And Daryl tries to deflect this and say, like, no, Kevin, like, the police stop crimes. What are you talking about? So Kevin's like, oh, no, 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 no. So we start to more and more that Kevin talks, he is to start to sound even more crazy, to the point of Dr. Norris is to start to therapize or analyze Kevin. Going on and asking Kevin, uh, like about himself, or even to get to the point of talking about his mother. But we also have Kevin that is to talk about Daryl's bulletproof clothes and his belt buckle uh, in this session. And so we have Dr. Norris talk about Kevin's mother, and we have Kevin who is like, well, I will slap you upside your head for talking about my mother. So Kevin and Daryl both leave. Kevin asks, why didn't you tell, uh, of course, this doctor about you being Blankman? And so Daryl says that it is his secret identity, his calling. So Kevin is to just really understand at this point that this might be just Daryl dealing with the grief or loss of his grandmother, and that if they're going to do this, they're going to do it together. And we come to find out that doing it together is to set up a neighborhood watch, which we immediately have Daryl that realizes that this is a stupid thing to do, that nobody is really interested in putting together a neighborhood watch, as they've been standing there for hours without anybody really interested. We all of a sudden have a girl who runs to these two men needing help. And after Kevin and Daryl are to come up with all these weird and goofy scenarios about this girl getting stalked or followed, or someone is to try to hurt her or whatever, we of course have this girl who is to lead Kevin and then eventually Blankman to this place where a woman is stuck in this elevator. And we find out that this woman is pregnant. So we have Kevin who is to tell the woman, it's like, well, hey, like, just hang on, like, we're gonna get some help to you. So Blankman runs in with this gadget called the Spectrum of Life to open this elevator and widen it, to then hopefully with his hands open it even further to completely open the doors. And so Blankman deploys this unusual plunger rope system that looks kind of like a somewhat grappling gun like thing, and is to go on and kind of swing to smack right into this elevator shaft's wall. And then Kevin is to drop an inch from where they were to see that the elevator is right there. I'm like, of course we do this. So we have Kevin that goes to get to the woman into the elevator, as we of course have Blankman, who is using his weird grappling gun device to kind of slow himself down there. And so we have Blankman radioing that they need emergency assistance at this location. And so we have Kevin that is to tell the woman to like grab his hand as Daryl, of course, is going to be forced to deliver this baby right here in this elevator. So we have this woman who is trying to grab for this guy's hand to instead grab for uh, this man's uh, manhood instead. So, with of course this woman stating that this guy has a really big finger. And we of course have Kevin who's like, yeah, thanks, I appreciate it. So, we have Daryl who is to deliver this baby as both Kevin and the pregnant woman are screaming to high heavens. Because of course this woman is crushing his down belows. So, we would of course have Blankman with child, and he is to state words like, I'm a father, and this baby is not his. So we have both Kevin and the woman who end up getting out of the elevator shaft, and we are to, of course, now have all these like emergency staff and all these people from this apartment who are now by this elevator. And so we even start to have reporters who are to cover this story. And so we go on to have the pregnant woman who is to ask who this man was who was to deliver her child. And we would, of course, have Kevin go on and state, it's like, well, hey, he's Blankman. And so, like, all right, like, that's his name, Blankman, finally. So, we come to find that the newspapers have covered the story of a masked man who delivers. So, we now have Daryl who is to go on and have these kind of montages and stuff like that of trying to fight crime and be in situations where it's difficult to do so. So, Blankman tries to stop a robbery from people trying to take things from a certain person's house, and we have Blankman trying to go into a porta-john to try and change, and then he realizes what a mistake that is. We have a kid that asks Blankman to help the kid from this dog that is stuck from underneath her house. And we come to find that Blankman is going to have to save a dog that might go on and tear him to shreds. And so Blankman, of course, tries to save this dog, but also get heavily attacked by it. So we next have Blankman, who is to stop a convenience store robbery with a mannequin-like boot, which of course we see here, with a rope that we also see here. And we have Blankman throw this boot to then, of course, go on and knock out this this robber, to where the convenience store clerk grabs the gun in midair and is to take it from this robber and is to hold up a sign that states that this shop or this store was saved by Blankman. So we of course go on now to have Harris that hears from Jones talking about Blankman on the news, that he realizes that if Blankman is to be making a difference, that so does Harris. And so Harris has Minnelli come in, and so Harris is going on to tell Minnelli that he is going to talk to the district attorney and arrest Minnelli for bribery and extortion. And so Minnelli is like, well, like, wait a minute, like, are you trying to, like, like get more money out of me? Are you trying to get like some leverage like out of me? Like, and so Harris is like, no. And so Nelly's like, oh, so you're just asking for trouble at this point. And Harris is like, yeah, I am. So Kevin comes home to a place full of gadgets and appliances, and is to come to find out that Blankman was even offered $5,000 of money, and we had Daryl refuse that to instead have people bring him or send him junk. So we have Kevin who is just so upset that of course Daryl or Blankman did not take this money, that he is to kind of force them out. So Daryl and J5 need to find a hideout, a place to take all of their crap and put it elsewhere. So at first we have Daryl and J5 who go to this place and call it the Blank Store, and they're like, no, it doesn't seem quite right. They then go to a bus stop and call it the Blank Stop, and they're like, no, it would probably be too cold in the winter. And so they then finally find an abandoned like subway station and call it the Blank Station, and like, yeah, like that sounds like a good ring to it. So we have Kevin back at his work, wanted to do a story about Manelli. It seems that there's something there that he can really like sink his teeth into to come up with a story. And Jones wants to do a story instead about Blankman. She wants to do an interview, but she doesn't know how to get that story. And so we have Kevin that goes on to say, it's like, well, hey, I can get you that story. Like, I have some real news reporting techniques that you don't even know about and all this. And so come to find out that technique is to beg and plead with Daryl to do the interview. Please, Daryl, please do the interview. And we would of course have Daryl that refuses because he's like, no, like Blankman doesn't go on and like seek out like interviews, and so we of course have Kevin that's like, come on, like do this interview. And so we finally have Daryl that agrees, but he states that Jones needs to wear carnation. And we of course have Kevin who states like, well, why carnation? Kevin's like, you wouldn't, or Daryl's like, you wouldn't understand. And so then Kevin is to leave because at least he agreed to this. So we come to find Jones who's wearing this carnation at this subway station, and she ends up getting picked up by Blankman, who is now driving this thing called the Blank Wheel. It's a like custom motorcycle that is to go on and be able to drive onto a subway rail. So that is just really fascinating. And so we of course have Jones who is to ask them like where they're going, and she also compliments Blankman on saying this is great, and each time Blankman needs to turn off the engine to hear whatever the heck that she was going on and saying. And so then when she would say these things, like, oh, okay, all right, and then he would get the engine going again. Funny enough, when we have, of course, Kevin in the backseat of this, we have at a certain point where Kevin is to say something, and Daryl's like, wait, I'm going to turn the engine off. And we, of course, have Kevin who slaps Daryl, is like, no, just keep going. So we have Jones, who at some point is to lose her shoe, and because there's a whole point to that. There's a a nice gesture that Blankman goes on and does. So we have Jones that makes her way to the blank station, and she, of course, is to state that she was kind of confused and she was getting a headache. And Blankman goes on to say, "It's like, well, hey, I'm sorry, yeah, like I had to confuse you of where we were going so that way you wouldn't easily know where the blank station is. Where I'm assuming you should just go on and just find any abandoned like station, and like it would probably not be that hard." So we of course have uh, Jones being introduced to J5, and Jones looks around at what is clearly to be junk, but she ends up calling it great junk, drunk, junk with a J. Yeah. So Jones asks if Blankman is happy, and he states like, "Well, how can I be happy? There's so much work to do." So Blankman says, as Jones is to ask him, it's like, "Well, do you feel that you're special?" And he's like, "No, like I'm not that special at all." He says that he was to see something wrong and wanted to do something about it. He had lost his grandmother and is to go on and then kiss Jones, and then is to start to and start to fall onto the ground in utter agony for some goofy reason. So Kevin, we then next see, watches TV mentioning Blankman. We have Arsenio Hall that is to talk about Bobby Brown, which I'm sure would have a lot of people be like, "Who the heck is Bobby Brown?" Because that seems so relevant today. He, of course, was a musician at some point. So we are to also have Kevin, who is watching some talk show host, who is to have a number of other heroes that are to go on and become heroes because of Blankman, and they end up kind of showing their strengths or weaknesses upon this talk show. And so we then have Daryl that comes home and he's in love with Kimberly, and so we have immediately where Kevin's like, "Oh, come on, like you're not really in love. What are you talking about?" And Daryl's like, "Well, like maybe I'm not in love, but Blankman is in love with Kimberly Jones." And so we have Daryl who mentions that they had kissed, and Kevin's like, "Wait a minute, you kissed? Like what?" Like it maybe might have been just like a buddy kiss or something like that. And we of course have Daryl that's like, "Well, yeah, I didn't really like that tongue in my mouth." And Kevin's like, "What? What?" So we then have Kevin who is to go to work, and Kevin is to have tried to win over Jones by giving her a bouquet of flowers or a dozen of flowers, and is to have the card that says, "For your would-be producer that always produces, Kevin." And we all of a sudden have Kimberly that is to find this box, and Kevin is to say, "Oh, that's chocolates also for me." And we would find instead that Kimberly would open up this box to find her shoe that she had lost. And she's like, "Oh, that's such a romantic gesture." And Kevin's like, "An old busted up shoe." An old funky shoe. So we have Jones who runs to go on and do the news, and We have her uh, kind of cue up this footage of Harris, who is uh, going to redeem police officers who are obviously needing some IOUs because they haven't gotten paid in a while, to head their way to the First City Bank, and they will get paid accordingly. As well as Blankman is to uh, get uh, a specific or a certain reward for the things that he has gone on to do to really inspire Harris to kind of change his ways. So we have Harris, who is to mention that this city is going into the Blankman era. Wouldn't they have gone on and said the blank era? I don't know. But so Blankman thanks Kimberly Jones as he is to accept his award. And so we then have Harris, who is to open up the bank for certain people to get much needed money. So Manelli, it seems, is as well as Manelli's men are to really just follow Harris into the bank, and they are to lock the bank behind him, and Manelli is to come from a explosion underneath the bank to then appear bizarrely in satin. So we, of course, because of this situation, are to have one of the police officers look at Blankman to respond to this situation. And so Blankman makes his way to this door and is to plead to the man. It's like, well, can't we just talk about this like civilized people? And so on and so on. And so all of a sudden, Blankman ends up getting shoved into this bank in this situation. So we find that Harris is to be chained to the vault, as we also have Blankman, who is to be chained himself. And so we, of course, have Manelli state that a common uh, like bomb disposal unit would have like a certain number of minutes to try and uh, counter a bomb, so he's going to give 3 minutes. And so we then have, of course, Manelli leave so the rest of his men can go on and collect this money from this vault. We have Blankman, who is to get his blank goop and stink bombs to have the goons rush out of the vault and close the vault by accident and realize that they cannot go on and get to the money. And Harris is like, well, good job, Blankman. Now those evil men can't get this money. And so they realize, considering the bombs are about to go off soon, that they are going to just leave. So Blankman is to go on and unchain himself because he knows how to get out of tight situations. And so Kevin then is to take his camera and is to thrust it into a police officer to run into the bank to try and help out Daryl in this situation. And Blankman is to try to stop the bomb as Kevin tries to pull Blankman away. Blankman disarms the bomb, and they go on to hear more ticking, and they're like, okay, what is that sound? Come to find out there is another bag with a ton of bombs, and they realize that I guess they don't have enough time to disarm those bombs, and so we have both Blankman and other guy, or Blankman and just Kevin because he's not in his costume. They realize that there is not enough time to save Harris. So they need to just run out of this bank. So before they absolutely leave, we have this just really heartbreaking moment where Blankman reveals who he is to Harris and tells Harris that his grandmother, Grandma Walker, was to really believed in Harris and so on and so forth. And we have Harris who is to tell Blankman that he will give his grandmother his love, as he of course will probably die here. And so we have Blankman and Kevin running out of this bank, and behind them it explodes. So Jones is to hug on to Blankman as everyone is just going on and turning around and blaming Blankman for this happening. Even having this police, I believe it's a police chief that is going on to tell Blankman, it's like, well, hey, like I entrusted in Blankman, and like he should be the one that you should all be blaming, and yada yada yada. So we have all the people that were also like desperate to get their money, and now they can't go on and just easily do so. So we then have Blankman after watching or after Harris's death is to realize that he is to give up being Blankman, turning off the blank stop and turning off the power there. And Kevin is just to see Daryl watching Harris's funeral and all the coverage for 3 days straight, and needs Daryl to just move on, to just do something else. And Daryl's like, what do I do? And Kevin's like, I don't know, get a job. So we find Daryl working at McDonald's, and the very first customer he gets, he ends up getting him McMad instead of getting him anything else. He does give him a burger, though, but still, he gets McMad. So Daryl is on this subway, and he is looking into this handbook, and we all of a sudden have a woman who's getting mugged, and Daryl doesn't step in and do anything at this point, having this woman now slapping Daryl's handbook and calling him weird, to the point of him just kind of deciding to go into another seat to get away from that woman. So we have Manelli, who finds Mr. Stone, hoping that he has a way to get to Blankman, because like, yeah, I really just want to finish up and get to all the people that have gone against me, and of course that last person is to be Blankman. So we have Manelli who pours hot coffee over Mr. Stone's legs, and he's like, what are you doing? It's like, don't you realize, like, I'm paralyzed from the waist down? Like, I don't feel nothing. And so we go on to have Manelli who's starting to slap Mr. Stone, and he's like, are you through? It's like, man, I love this guy. So we finally have Stone, who is to take Manelli by this chair, and they stroll through this basement to have Stone tell Manelli that Jones, of course, is Blankman's love interest. So Jones is looking through this footage and is starting to tie things together that Manelli had gone on and murdered Kevin and Daryl's grandmother. And so Jones tries to call Kevin to let him know this, and all of a sudden Manelli is to grab the phone and is to talk to who he thinks is Blankman, and is to tell him to, like, hey, like, get your costume, get your tights, like, let's go, like, I have your woman, and so on and so forth. So we have Kevin, who is to hang up that phone, and he runs off to McDonald's for a Big Mac. No, he runs off to McDonald's to talk to Daryl and convince him that he needs to be Blankman again, and that Jones is in danger, and she will be killed unless Blankman doesn't show up. So Daryl is to tell Kevin, it's like, well, hey, I gave up that life, and now needs to prepare for a meetup with Ronald McDonald coming to this McDonald's. So, like, Daryl really has to, like, get his crew ready. And so Kevin tells Daryl, it's like, hey, Manelli killed our grandmother. And so then Daryl is to say, it's like, well, then Manelli is going down. And so Daryl wants Kevin to put on the costume, and Kevin refuses. And so Daryl starts to go on and go back to his job. And so Kevin's like, okay, I'll wear it, like, and forcibly agrees. So we have the two of them that go back to the blank station as they're looking at the blank screen and getting a plan of where to go into the building. And we, of course, have we have Kevin, who's just like, why not just go through the front? And we have Daryl that's like, well, that's what they'll be expecting. So, like, we have, bizarrely, Daryl who's like, instead of going here, like, we'll go here. Okay, sure. So, they get into their blank suits, and so we have them drive off in the blank wheel. So, while Kevin is to say something to Daryl is like, wait a minute, let me turn the engine off. And we, of course, have Kevin that slaps Daryl's like, no, just keep going. So at the news station, we had Stone that wanted to make a bargain with Manelli to do some interviews. So now Manelli is going on and doing said thing. And we have this interviewer that is talking about, has Manelli ever done a crime? And of course Manelli says no. And so Stone is like, no, like, dig deeper, where's the edge? And so we have this interviewer that is to say to Manelli, like, Mr. Manelli, are you gay? And so Manelli whips out this gun and shoots the interviewer. And we now have Stone. It's like, well, that's real television. So we have, of course, Blankman and the other guy that crash through this window to catch Manelli off guard. And so Manelli is to be the one that comes up with the name of other guy's name, other guy. So we go on to have Manelli, who is to tell his men to fight the heroes. And we, of course, have things going poorly for both of them. We even have a point where Blankman is like, well, yeah, let's go back to back. And we have Blankman who gets kind of punched, and we have Kevin who's looking back, is like, hey, Blankman, how we're doing? And Blankman, of course, is consistently being thrown or chucked or whatever somewhere. So Manelli is to put a gun upon these two men and is to put them in the Lucky Lotto machine, where I guess at certain point the water is going to heavily rise, and that we also have Manelli, who is to state that there is a secret bomb somewhere in the building. So we, as Manelli and everyone is the bad guy side is to leave, we all of a sudden have Blankman, who is to do this kind of weird Batman outro. And Kevin is to want to go on and state that's like, dude, I'm going to punch you in the face. Like, if you don't go on, you stop this. So, like, we need to figure out what we're going to do and to get out of this. And we have Blankman, who's like, well, don't worry about it. Like, J5 is coming. He's gonna make his way here. As we start to see J5, who is just freaking smashing his way down these steps. So we go on to have J5, who comes to where both Blankman and both Kevin are, to drill these two holes into the Lucky Lotto machine. And so all of a sudden this water is starting to come down. So we have Blankman that starts to realize, like, okay, like, let's just start kicking the glass and we should get free from that. And so they do. So we have Jones that tells both Blankman and other guy to just save themselves from this bomb, and Blankman tells Jones that he will never forget her, and and is to immediately just realize that she's right and he should just leave. And then he's like, oh, that was a blank joke. Yeah, sure it was. So he immediately just comes back and is to have J5 get some adjustments so J5 could turn into this bomb sniffing thing that, of course, J5 can track down where this bomb is. So they make their way all the way to the women's bathroom to find this bomb. And so now J5 is to take to the streets. And so Blankman and other guy, before getting back with J5, rush back to both Jones and Stone. And we, of course, have Kevin, who is to tell Blankman, it's like, please tell us that we can go on and not tell Stone that we didn't find the bomb. And Daryl's like, well, why? And Kevin's like, because I just want to mess with him. And so Blankman is like, okay, sure. So we have other guy going in there. And so he goes in there. He's like, oh my God, we didn't find the bomb. The building's going to blow. And so we have Stone who's like, what are you talking about? What's going on? And so we have Kevin we have other guy who is telling Stone that Blankman only has time to save his baby girl. And so we have Blankman that is telling Jones, like, hey, play along. And so we have other guy that is to grab Stone and is telling him, like, be strong, be strong. And he tells him, I'll never forget you. And so he runs off. And so Stone is like jerking around in his chains. He's like, I'll get you, I'll kill you. So we then have Blankman and other guy running off to meet up with J5. And so Blankman and other guy are telling everybody to spread away or spread out away from J5 as he's going to explode. And so then he does, and we have Blankman that thinks that J5 might be so durable that he could have survived this blast, but then all of a sudden he just tears apart and falls over. And so then, of course, we have Blankman who's like, J5! And so then we, of course, have Blankman who's like, Manelli, you're going down, I guess. So, so Jones goes on and does a report as Manelli is to realize that what they had done had probably failed. And so we see both Blankman and other guy who has gone on to find out where Manelli is to have his headquarters or hideout or whatever this is called, building of sorts. And so Manelli tells Sammy to shoot other guy, and so we have other guy that's like, well, yeah, like, shoot me. Do I have to paint a target upon my tuchus? He says something else, but I'm trying to censor myself. So we, of course, have Blankman who has to tell other guy, it's like, well, hey, like, Kevin, there's one thing that I forgot to tell you. Like, your costume isn't bulletproof, only mine is. And so when Kevin gets shot, he ends up going down. And so now Blankman has to go on and try and take out a lot of these guys. And so other guy goes on and tosses Blankman the nunchucks, as I don't know if they're called nunchucks or new chucks, but either way, it's still a cool invention. So we have Blankman that's like, all right, other guy, you brought the nunchucks. And so he is to kind of lawnmower get this nunchucks ready. And so it starts spinning around and starts hitting all the guys. And finally, we have the nunchucks that are to kind of theoretically run out of gas, I guess. And so we have Blankman that's trying to get it going again. And all of a sudden we have Sammy who has this gun in Blankman's direction. And so we all of a sudden see that Blankman is to kick the gun out of Sammy's hand. Blankman is like, wait a minute, did I just do that? So we have Blankman that is to take Sammy and shove him into this piano and close it. And as Manelli is to have a gun onto other guy, Blankman is to all of a sudden have his shoes become rockets, and is to have Manelli being tossed onto this cart and to be smashing through multiple doors, as we of course have Blankman telling Manelli that he was to have been the one to have killed his grandmother and all these other people that at one point Blankman had loved, and so on and so forth. So we have Manelli that flies into this armored car to be sent to jail. And so the next thing we see is Blankman getting an award for community service, and other guy getting this cool Blankman t-shirt. So what a great reward for other guy. So after Jones does her final report of this film, we then finally have Kevin, who is forcing Daryl to meet up with Jones. And so Daryl is kind of having this kind of like I don't know if I should go on and meet her because like she only really likes Blankman, and so like is she really gonna like a guy like me, and so on and so forth. So we have Daryl that starts talking to Jones about how Blankman is being a bit of a loser, and so Kimberly is to like, well, hey, I don't think that he's a loser. If anything, like she all of a sudden says like, oh my god, a purse snatcher, and Daryl's like, where? And so she goes on like, well, that's a job for Blankman, and right then and there, Daryl is to realize that Jones knows that he's Blankman, and so she's like, well, he's like, well, how do you know? And so she's like, well, I just know. So we then have the two of them that are kind of to seal the deal to make sure that she knows that Daryl is Blankman by them kissing. And again, we have Daryl who's and starts to fall to the ground. And we all of a sudden have Kevin who is worried that Kimberly has killed Daryl. And so, with the love that the two of them shared, as we roll credits. So with that said, I'm going to quickly try to get out of here. Let me know in the comments below how you felt about Blankman. If you liked this film, if you thought that it was kind of weird or goofy or whatever, because at the end of the day, I'm going to get out of here so I can go on and hopefully do another video. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.